what happens, in those moments around death, and then what's next? It's maybe the biggest question, right?
Absolutely.
And it's usually just uncertainty. But what if a tradition actually offered a really detailed map, like a microscopic view of those last moments and what comes right after, all based on, well, cause and effect?
That's precisely what we're looking at today. Our source is Dying to Live, the Role of Kamma in Dying and Rebirth by Aggacitta Bhikkhu. And it's quite a deep dive into the Theravada Buddhist take on this whole thing.
Okay, let's jump in then. We want to pull out the key ideas from the book for you to help understand kamma, consciousness, and, well, the mechanics of death and rebirth through this specific Theravada viewpoint.
And one thing the book points out straight away is how different this Theravada view is from some others, like the Tibetan or Chinese Mahayana idea of an intermediate state, the Bardo or Dzongchen.
Right, where there's a gap, maybe weeks long.
Yeah, maybe up to 49 days, traditionally. But in the Theravada perspective presented here, nope, rebirth is immediate, instantaneous.
Instantaneous. Wow, okay. And the book also says that how your kamma actually decides the next life. It's not always, like, simple or predictable. It mentions ordered randomness.
Ordered randomness. Sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it?
It does. And apparently the best way to get a handle on it is through some really striking stories.
Definitely. But first, we need just a tiny bit of groundwork, a quick look at the basic building blocks from Abhidhamma.
Abhidhamma. That's the really detailed analysis part of Theravada, right? Mind and matter, moment by moment.
Exactly that. It breaks down consciousness into these incredibly fast, fleeting moments called citas. Think mind moments. Each one pops up and vanishes instantly, like super fast.
Okay, so citas are the moments.
And with each cita come citasikas. These are the mental factors, feeling, perception, attention, intention, joy, sadness. All the things that give that mind moment its particular flavor.
So our whole experience is just this constant stream of super brief citas with different citasikas attached.
Pretty much. And here's a really crucial bit. The mental factor of volition. Citana. Within a mind moment, that is kamma.
Ah, okay, so kamma is the intention itself.
Yes, the intention behind any action, physical, verbal, or just mental. That intention creates a kind of potential energy, a seed for future results. And that potential doesn't just vanish when the cita ends.
Got it. Intention and kamma potential. And this stream of citas, it's not always our conscious thinking, is it? The book talks about pavanga.
Right. Most of the time, the stream just flows as the pavanga citta. You could think of it as the life continuum or like subconsciousness, maybe like your computer's background processes.
Or a screensaver, kind of.
Yeah, that works too. It's the basic flow when nothing specific like seeing, hearing, or thinking actively is interrupting it. Our normal conscious thoughts are just temporary interruptions to this underlying pavanga stream.
Okay. And what about at the very beginning and very end of the life?
So the very first cita of any existence is the rebirth linking cita. That's what connects this life to the last one. And the absolute last cita is the death cita.
And they're linked, even though there's a whole lifetime between them.
Fundamentally linked, yes, because they both take the exact same object. And in the case of death and rebirth, that object is what actually generates the next existence.
Okay, mind covered. What about matter?
Right, the physical side. The source mentions kalapas. These are described as like tiny bundles of material qualities, the most basic particles. And they come from 4 sources: kamma, cita itself, temperature, and nutriment.
And kamma-born kalapas are key at rebirth.
Crucial. The kamma that determines the new life also instantly produces these kamma-born kalapas at the exact same moment the rebirth cita arises. That forms the initial physical basis of the new being.
So kamma kickstarts both the new consciousness and the new body, basically.
Simultaneously, yeah. Understanding these basics, the fleeting citas, the kalapas, helps see how microscopic this whole process is described. But the big question for death and rebirth is how all that stored up kanic potential actually decides the next life.
And that brings us to the order of ripening.
Exactly. This is where the ordered part of ordered randomness really shows up. There's a clear hierarchy.
A priority system for kamma.
That's it. The source explains kamma can be sliced and diced in different ways, but for rebirth, the order of ripening is key. It dictates which potential kamma gets first dibs, essentially, on generating that rebirth cita.
Yeah.
4 types in strict order.
Okay, what are they?
First, priority, weighty kamma. Second, near-death kamma. Third, habitual kamma. And fourth, if none of those apply, reserve kamma.
So weighty kamma, if you have that, it trumps everything else. That's what determines the next life, period.
That's the top dog. Weighty kamma means really, really strong deeds, wholesome or unwholesome. Wholesome weighty kamma is like achieving and maintaining jhana, deep meditation states right up until you die. That's so powerful it guarantees rebirth in a high Brahma world.
And the unwholesome side? Heavy stuff.
The heaviest. These are specific heinous crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Killing your mother, killing your father, wounding a Buddha, causing a schism in the monastic community, the Sangha, or holding a really fixed, destructive, wrong view that denies basic morality.
Wow.
If you've done one of those, that unwholesome, weighty kamma takes absolute precedence. It forces a specific, usually very low rebirth.
The book mentions King Ajatasattu. He killed his father.
Yes. And even though he later listened to the Buddha and felt remorse, that weighty kamma was like a massive barrier. It prevented him from attaining stream entry right then. And Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin who tried to kill him and split the Sangha, same thing. Reborn in hell because of that weighty kamma.
But even then, future enlightenment isn't ruled out forever.
No, the source makes that clear. Once the karmic debt is paid, the path is still open. But that weighty kamma must ripen first.
Okay, so weighty kamma is pretty decisive, high or low. If that's not in the picture, what's next in line?
Next priority is near-death kamma. This is a really interesting one. It's a strong kamma, either an action done recently or often, just a memory or mental state that becomes really prominent right before the final moments.
This sounds like where things could get unpredictable. A single last thought could change things.
That's exactly the point, and it's quite startling. A single powerful thought, a strong feeling, or a vivid memory right at the end can apparently be strong enough to push aside a whole lifetime's worth of other kamma,
Wow.
just for determining the immediate next rebirth. The book has some amazing stories about this.
Like the ex-hunter. Tell me about that one.
Okay, so this guy, lifelong hunter, lots of killing. As he's dying, he's terrified, seeing this vision of a fierce black dog, likely a sign related to his past actions, a bad omen.
Yeah, that sounds bad.
But his son was a monk, a venerable Thera. He saw what was happening and knew he had to shift his father's mind. Really skillfully, he arranged for flowers to be offered at a nearby pagoda, brought his father's bed there, and told him, "Look at the flowers. Remember this good deed, this offering."
So guiding his final thoughts towards something positive.
Exactly. And in those very last moments, the father managed to focus just on that single wholesome act. The offering, the generosity, that positive focus right at the end became the most potent kamma operating at that moment. And despite the lifetime of killing, it led to a good rebirth.
That shows incredible power in the final mental state. What about the public executioner? That sounds like a tough case.
Yeah, 55 years doing state executions. On his very last day, he offered alms to Venerable Sariputta, one of the Buddha's chief disciples, and listened to a Dhamma talk. But he was still really tormented by remorse, seeing visions of those he'd killed.
Understandable.
Venerable Sariputta saw his distress and asked him, essentially, "Did you kill these people because you wanted to or because the king ordered you to?" The man said, "The king's orders." Sariputta then asked something like, "Well, if it was under orders, is there really any fault?"
The source calls that a deception. That sounds a bit tricky for a top disciple.
It does use that word, yeah. But it frames it as skillful means. Sariputta, with his wisdom and compassion, saw the man's mind was totally stuck in this loop of remorse, blocking any chance of peace or insight.
Ah, okay.
So the question wasn't really about letting him off the hook philosophically for the killing, but about disrupting that destructive mental state right then, skillfully breaking the cycle of agony in that crucial moment.
Right, to create an opening.
Precisely. And it worked. That mental relief, plus the Dhamma he'd heard, allowed the executioner to actually gain some insight knowledge just before he died in an accident soon after. The Buddha later confirmed he was reborn into Siddha heaven, a high celestial realm.
Because of that last-minute insight, overriding all those years of killing.
Apparently so. It shows how incredibly potent even a moment of wisdom can be right at the end.
So near-death kamma can pull you way up, but it can also pull you down, right? Like the story of the monk who became a flea.
Absolutely. A classic example of the downside. This was a virtuous monk, very diligent. But he got a beautiful new robe and developed this strong feeling of attachment, thinking, "Oh, I'll wear this tomorrow." Just that thought.
Seems minor compared to a life of practice.
You'd think so? But he died suddenly that night from indigestion, and that strong thought of attachment to the robe was the dominant mental state right at the moment of death.
Uh-oh.
So that attachment became his near-death kamma. And where to get reborn? Instantly, as a flea living in the folds of that very robe.
Whoa, for how long?
Just 7 days. But it shows how a single strong negative state, even attachment to something seemingly simple if it's the last powerful thought, can dictate the immediate next stop.
That's a serious warning about attachment. What about Queen Malika? She was virtuous too, wasn't she?
Hugely virtuous, known for incredible generosity. But one time, she told a small lie to her husband, the king. Something about being in the bathroom just to play a trick on him.
A little white lie, maybe.
It seems like it. But apparently, that memory, that specific unwholesome act, was prominent in her mind when she died. And the result? Rebirth in Avicii hell, the deepest hell, for 7 days.
7 days in the worst hell for one fib. That really underscores the power of that final mental object, if it's strong enough.
It really does. But notice the pattern in these stories, too. The flea, the queen. What happened after the 7 days?
Ah, right. Their story didn't end there.
Exactly. That near-death kamma's effect was potent, but relatively short-lived. Once its force was spent, what took over? Their huge store of good kamma from the rest of their lives.
Which sounds like it leads us to the next category.
Precisely. Once the immediate powerful effect of any weighty or near-death kamma runs out, the next level of priority kicks in, and that's habitual kamma.
So after the big dramatic events, it comes down to who you were consistently, your habits.
Pretty much. This is the type of action or the kind of mental state you cultivated repeatedly throughout your life.
Yeah.
If there's no weighty or strong near-death kamma calling the shots, your habitual tendencies are the most likely thing to surface and generate the rebirth consciousness.
Okay, clean example. The bhikkhu who became a diva.
Yeah, good one. This monk was known for really intense, strenuous meditation practice. That was his habit. He actually died from damaging his health, maybe pushing too hard.
Oh.
But because his habitual mental state was so focused on practice, he was reborn in Tabatimsa heaven, a high Devo realm. The story says he kind of woke up there, surrounded by celestial nymphs and luxury, but his first instinct was still sense restraint. He was confused, looking for his monk's robes.
Huh. So the habit was that strong, even in heaven.
Exactly. But that good habitual kamma put him in a great position. He used his new diva powers to visit the Buddha, got some brief instructions, and attained stream entry right there.
So the habit secured a good rebirth, which then allowed for quick spiritual progress. The source mentioned he might have been doing insight meditation, vipassana.
Yes, it suggests that his habitual practice, and possibly his state at death, involved vipassana, which is considered particularly beneficial for the next life.
What about the flip side? Bad habits.
Kunda the Butcher. A really grim, classic example. His lifelong habit was torturing and killing pigs with extreme cruelty. As he was dying, his own suffering mirrored that he was apparently making pig-like noises and in agony for 7 days.
His habit manifesting as his death experience.
It seems so. That habitual cruelty became his sign of destiny. He died and was reborn in hell, a direct result of his ingrained habitual actions.
Very clear cause and effect there. Any more positive examples, Dhammika Upasaka?
Yes, a great lay follower. His habit was virtue, generosity, listening to the Dhamma. On his deathbed, monks were chanting the Satipatthana Sutta for him, and he started seeing visions not of past deeds or pain, but chariots arriving from different heavens.
So, visions of his potential next destinations, like options.
Exactly. The source calls these signs of destiny, arising from his habitual merit. He actually told the divas driving the chariots to wait, because he wanted to keep listening to the chanting.
Priorities.
Right. His kids misunderstood and told the monks to stop. Anyway, when he could speak, he described the chariots. They asked him which heaven was best. The kids suggested Tusita heaven, and he said, okay, Tusita it is. He gave them a flower garland to symbolically hang on the Tusita chariot, took refuge, and passed away, reborn right there.
Choosing his destination based on his good habits. That's amazing. The source also had that more recent story about the dutiful mother.
Yes, observed by a meditation teacher. This woman seemed peaceful at death, although the teacher noted her family was wailing nearby, which isn't ideal as it can reinforce attachment.
Right, we heard that warning.
The teacher perceived celestial vehicles arriving for her signs of destiny again. The details were a bit unusual, like an Elizabethan carriage with Chinese drivers first, then a bigger one. This kind of highlights how personal or cultural elements might color these deathbed visions, whether seen by the dying person or a clairvoyant observer.
Interesting.
The teacher felt the divas were being respectful, acknowledging the woman's merit, and maybe the teacher's presence too. The point was, her habitual kamma as a loving, caring mother was likely paving the way for a fortunate rebirth.
Okay, so we have weighty, near-death, habitual. What if none of those are really dominant at the moment of death? What's left?
That's where the fourth category comes in, reserve kamma. This is basically everything else. All the other kammas you've created in this life that haven't ripened yet in one of those stronger ways, plus the unimaginable backlog of kamma from all your past lives stretching back.
So it's the default option.
Kind of. It's the kamma that ripens when the more potent effects of weighty, near-death, or habitual kamma aren't active, or when their immediate influence is faded. It fills the gap.
Like with the monk who was a flea, how did he end up in Tusita heaven eventually?
Perfect example. The near-death kamma, that strong attachment to the robe, generated the immediate, short, unfortunate rebirth as a flea. That was his specific result. But once that result was exhausted after 7 days, what was the next strongest potential available?
His lifetime of being a virtuous monk.
Exactly. His strong habitual kamma from his life as a monk. At that point, after the flea life, that habitual kamma functioned as his reserve kamma, the most potent force ready to ripen, and that propelled him to rebirth into Tusita heaven.
Okay, that makes sense. And the story of Kane, the boy who remembered past lives, how does reserve kamma fit there?
That's a really powerful illustration. Kone remembered being a fighting cock, then a calf both owned and killed by a butcher named Konyo. Those animal rebirths were the result of specific, likely unwholesome kammas ripening.
Right.
But then he was reborn as a human again. To get a human rebirth requires a significant stock of wholesome kamma. Since his immediately preceding lives were animal, where did that wholesome kamma come from?
It must have been older stuff, from before the animal lives.
Exactly. It had to be reserve kamma, likely from a previous human life, maybe even from his life as the hunter, before he became the cock and the calf. He was just sitting there waiting in reserve until conditions were right for it to ripen and produce a human rebirth.
And that story apparently changed the butcher's life.
Completely. Hearing the boy recount the suffering he experienced as the animals Kunio himself had killed was so impactful, Kunio vowed never to kill again. It shows the ripple effect.
These stories really make the mechanics feel real, not just abstract theory.
They absolutely do. They show how this order of ripening plays out, determining which potential kamma actually manifests as the rebirth sita. And just to recap the Abhidhamma view of the transition itself.
Right. The instantaneous part.
Yeah, after the very last conscious process, which takes one of these things as its object, the kamma itself, maybe a sign of the kamma like the black dog or the pig sounds, or a sign of destiny like the heavenly chariots.
Okay.
The death sita arises and immediately ceases, vanishes. Instantly. No time gap, not even a microsecond. The rebirth linking sita arises in the new existence. And crucially, it takes the exact same object as that final death process did. Simultaneously, the kamma driving this rebirth also produces the first physical matter, the kamma-born kalapas.
So it's a seamless, immediate handover. Mind and matter starting together in the new life.
That's the Theravada picture presented here. No waiting room, no intermediate state.
Okay. So we've got the concepts, the order of priority, these incredible stories showing the ordered randomness and the microscopic instantaneous transition. Now, the big questions there. What can you do with this? How does this knowledge help someone approach death skillfully?
Right. It shifts everything towards preparation, towards cultivating the mind. The source talks about traditional practices designed specifically to help create the best possible mental state in those final critical moments.
Like actively reminding the dying person of their good deeds.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The book even suggests maybe keeping a kind of merit list throughout life. It's something that can be read to you or you could recall. And also providing opportunities to make good kamma near the end.
Oh.
Things like chanting, playing Dhamma talks, maybe offering flowers or making a donation in their name, having them recite the refuges and precepts if they're able, or guiding them in meditation if they have a practice.
And letting go seems absolutely crucial.
Totally vital. Helping the person release attachments to people, to possessions, worries, and especially regrets or guilt. Remember the monk and the robe, Queen Malika and the lie. Those stories are stark warnings about letting negative states dominate the end.
And the book warns about relatives wailing too much.
Yeah, it strongly cautions against it. Understandable grief, of course, but excessive wailing can actually amplify the dying person's own attachment and distress, making it harder for them to find peace.
There's that detailed story about Venerable Dr. Restrapal Maharat helping Mr. Chowdhury die. That seemed to bring all these points together.
It's a fantastic case study, really. It shows how Mr. Chowdhury's visions, the signs of destiny, changed dramatically depending on his focus. When he was thinking religious thoughts, he saw positive signs like the Bodhi tree or heavenly chariots. When worldly thoughts or suffering came up, he saw scary things like a hairy creature or black pigeons.
And the monk wasn't just watching this happen.
Not at all. He was actively involved, using his skill and compassion. He chanted specific suttas, and the negative visions apparently vanished. He administered the precepts, and the positive signs returned. He even tried to transfer merit.
And he talked to the devas who came for the man?
Apparently so. He dialogued with the beings in the chariots, telling them it wasn't time yet, asking them to wait. The account mentions the devas seemed to defer to the monk's spiritual authority.
So the monk's actions really seemed to influence the dying man's state and maybe even his immediate destiny.
That's the strong implication. It powerfully reinforces the idea that while kamma runs deep, that final mental state is incredibly critical, and skillful support, chanting, guidance, compassion can make a real difference in shaping that state and the perceived signs.
Okay, so let's try to wrap this up. The ripening of kamma for rebirth has this ordered randomness, weighty, near-death, habitual, reserve. Understanding that order gives us some real agency, doesn't it? Especially over the near-death and habitual types.
Exactly. We can't always change past weighty kamma, but we can influence our habits and potentially our state of mind at the very end. And the book's core message, really, is that the absolute best preparation for death
Is how you live your life now.
precisely
Yeah.
consistently cultivating wholesome kamma through dana giving, generosity, through sila ethical conduct, virtue, and through bhavana meditation, mental development, building those positive habits day in, day out.
Makes sense.
But the source puts special emphasis on practicing vipassana, insight meditation, particularly as one approaches death. Why? Because vipassana directly trains the mind to see things clearly and crucially, to let go of attachments, aversions, and delusions.
Ah, letting go again.
Yes, if you can maintain that clear awareness and non-attachment in the final moments, you hugely increase the chances that your rebirth-linking consciousness, that very first sitter of the next life, will be what's called a three-rooted consciousness.
Meaning rooted in?
Rooted in non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion, or wisdom, the three wholesome roots.
And why is that specific type of consciousness so important for the next life?
Because a mind starting out with those wholesome roots is like having the best possible foundation for that entire existence. It naturally leads to more favorable circumstances, better mental faculties, and crucially, a much greater capacity for making rapid spiritual progress on the path to liberation in that life.
So it's not just about getting a good rebirth, but one that's actually primed for growth and eventual freedom from suffering. Starting off on the best possible foot.
That's the idea, setting yourself up for potentially much faster progress right from the beginning of the next life.
That's quite profound. So, given how much impact our final moments might have, based on everything we build up beforehand, maybe a final thought for you, listening. What's just one small thing, one small step you could take today to start strengthening the kind of mental state, the kind of positive habit, or the kind of wisdom that you'd actually want to have with you when you face that unknown moment of death?